you. Thank you, Michael. I am going to share my screen here, and I'm going to do it differently than I usually do, so bear with me. How does that look? You can see my little part. Awesome. Okay. So yes, we are here to talk about the sacrament of marriage. And as we go through, if something I say doesn't make sense or a question pops into your head, feel free to just unmute and interrupt me. If you want to do that, that's totally fine. It won't disrupt me. I welcome the tangents, and I'm not, an expert, so I'm always open to your thoughts and opinions and your kind of disagreements as we go through this. So it's going to be a community effort. So since we're talking about marriage, I want to introduce you a little bit to my family. So my name is Linda. My pronouns are she and her. I live in Lexington, Michigan, USA. And we live on one of the Community of Christ campgrounds here in Michigan, where my husband, Kurt, is the caretaker. So he's also a church employee. He is not a Zoom person, so you unfortunately won't get to see him or hear his opinions or thoughts on marriage, even though we like to do weddings separately and together. And then these are our two kids, Arbor and Emmy. So I think they're getting probably a pretty spoiled childhood being raised at a Community of Christ campground. There's always lots of people to play with and talk to, and lots of property to run and play. So as I said, I serve as the chaplain for Harmony. Many of you may be familiar with Harmony. Harmony is an organization, a nonprofit that provides advocacy, education, and resources for queer folks in Community of Christ, with a shared vision of full participation for queer folks in Community of Christ. We have the little star here because I do know that word queer is uncomfortable for some folks. Here we're using it as an inclusive umbrella term. It's often used in academic work on the LGBTQ plus community. So we use that there with inclusion and respect. And I want to acknowledge that that is an uncomfortable word for some people. So I thought we would start at the beginning. What is marriage? And I'm going to go ahead and break a cardinal PowerPoint rule right out the gate and put a ton of text on this slide, which you're not supposed to do. You're supposed to put the highlights. But knowing this is going to be recorded and referenced later, I wanted to have more information on here. So I apologize. I know it's an eyesore. For this slide and for much of the presentation, I leaned on this book. You've been going through the Sacraments, so I'm sure this is a familiar text to many of you, but it's I'm going to say it's a fairly new text because 2005 doesn't feel like that long ago, but we're pushing 20 years. And there are some ways that the text shows its age. So with our first kind of bullet point here, the text is showing its age a bit. It's describing marriage as a covenant between a man and a woman seeking to make a lifelong commitment of mutual support, love, and faithfulness to each other. It's a good definition, but like I said, it's very heteronormative. This next description comes out of the same text, and you can see it's also a really nice way of thinking about marriage. It's a mutual agreement between two people for lifelong companionship. So this is a definition or a way of thinking about marriage that doesn't even really ask us to comment on gender or relationships. It's an agreement between two people for this long-term companionship. And then I liked this next portion here that tells us a little bit about the qualities of marriage. And we'll talk a bit more in a few slides about what makes marriage a sacrament. But this starts to touch on it, that marriage has at its ideal this depth and integrity of a relationship that's like what God has in their covenant with humanity. And so that's a pretty lofty goal for two people to accomplish together in marriage. But what an amazing way to think about our relationships with our marriage partners. So marriage is kind of a unique sacrament because it has a legal aspect as well. that we don't have with some of our other sacraments. Baptism or laying on of hands, the government doesn't get involved. So this is one of those weird situations where the government and the church kind of share this experience. So we want to talk a little bit about what the church's understanding is of marriage and what's maybe unique about marriage in Community of Christ. I included this first bullet just thinking about being a minister and planning a ceremony and meeting with a couple. I think especially most of the couples that Kurt and I have worked with, they've lived together for a few years, they've been dating for a while, they're splitting how they pay the bills. One of the things that people will say, is that, well, nothing's really going to change, when we get married. We've been living together, so I don't really think anything's going to be different. This is something that I hear from almost every couple that's already living together before they get married. And the reality is that things do change, and in ways that you would not expect. And I think if I could boil it down to explain what makes it different is this depth of relationship, this depth of commitment that you don't find in other relationships. And in the church, we think about that because it is a sacrament, or it has a covenant aspect to it. So as you're meeting with couples, this is something to think about and something that you'll hear often. Another important thing, this appears in the second bullet, came from the priesthood manual. So this is probably something you've looked at in the other toolbox sessions, because there's this one's also showing its age, but there's still nuggets in here that are really good. And what the second bullet here really uplifts is that we want people to be in marriages and relationships that are whole, where one person isn't holding power over another to limit their growth, right, and their wholeness. I think this second bullet, I don't know if I'll be able to pull it up right here, but it is in response to, let's see what section it's in. It's from section, I want to say 111, but bear with me. Okay, yes. So the second bullet, like I said, I think this is important, and it goes under this portion about kind of the church's understanding of marriage, is that we want to be sure it's not a relationship that's manipulative. So this portion is really in response to what we're going to see in section 111 of Doctrine and Covenants, and this is 2B. This is the portion, and we'll talk more about this later, about do you both mutually agree to be each other's companion, husband and wife, observing the legal rights belonging to this condition, that is, keeping yourselves holy for each other and from all others during your lives. Now, I think, in our understanding, we probably know that this is really talking about adultery, but this point of clarification comes up in the priesthood manual because we want to be clear that when we say keeping yourselves holy from each other, it doesn't mean that you can't have friendships and family relationships and church and community relationships that can help to keep your relationship healthy, whole, and keep you growing as an individual. So that's an important thing to note about what our intention is when we say that and what it means to be in a healthy marriage. Is that clear as mud? Does that make sense? So if you get that question, because if you're doing a marriage, especially with people outside Community of Christ who may not be familiar with what we're like, and maybe they have a taste of submissive marriage from other faith communities, they might take some issue with that line. So we always want to remember and keep in mind what the church's understanding is of marriage. And then, as I said, adultery is seen as a violation of the covenant relationship, and that is outlined in a little bit more detail in the priesthood manual if you're interested in that. We're not gonna dally over that one. So talking about, healthy marriages and relationships, what makes it sacramental, what makes it a whole relationship, I want to direct your attention to the Community of Christ Statement of Sexual Ethics. You can download that from SharePoint and the Community of Christ website. And if you're not familiar with it, it's a really interesting document. But one of the things it does touch on is the sacrament of marriage. So it's pointing out here that this marriage and community of Christ refers to monogamous marriage. It's based on this covenant principle that we talked about, God's covenant with humanity. They're really stressing sexual fidelity and uplifting a whole sexual activity between couples that is respecting one another's physical health, mental health, spiritual health, that we want to see that lifted up in relationships and in marriages. But it should be about consent and wholeness for each other. And so I think it's important to touch on that in this statement of sexual ethics as it relates to marriage relationships. I can't speak to what it was like overseas because I am a United States citizen. But there is quite a bit of history here where women were actually not allowed to say no to husbands who wanted to have sex, or that a husband could initiate or have sex with his wife against her will, and that would not be considered rape. So I think it's important when we talk about sexual ethics to talk about consent, even in marriage relationships, that this is a relationship that should be good for each other, for both people in the relationship. And then also something else this statement on sexual ethics does is affirms that you can lead a fulfilling life without being sexually active. Celibacy is mentioned a bit in the Bible. We know it's a Christian practice in some traditions, but also people who are asexual, that is also affirmed as a valid way of being in community. So as we think about marriage, and we'll talk a little bit more about marriage counseling, I want to uplift that and encourage you just to take a look at it. I know it's awkward to have conversations about sex, but it is important. It's an aspect of many marriages. And it's not to say that you have to have all the uncomfortable conversations, but you can initiate conversations between the people who are preparing for marriage. So familiarize yourself with that when you have time. I wanted to talk a bit about the history of marriage. This history is going to be so brief that it probably doesn't deserve to be called history. But I just want to kind of touch on why marriage is the way it is in our tradition. We've talked a little bit about how it's kind of a legal arrangement, and it's also a religious or spiritual experience. So during Jesus's time, marriages were secular celebrations, but it became practice to have blessings, prayers, readings, things like that during the ceremony that expresses an aspect of what the couple is like and what is important. And I know for me, it's been meaningful to have a blessing from ministers that are important or family, church family, to add their blessings to those marriage ceremonies. So this is a practice that kind of developed over time. And, in modern times in Western culture, typically kind of includes both religious and secular pieces in a marriage ceremony. I'm sure everyone was so excited to be here with me this evening that you went through and you read the whole section on marriage in here. So I'm going to tell you something that you already know. But in this text, they actually caution against using secular elements, which I thought was kind of interesting. So if you care to look at it later, it's on page 105 here. It says, this sacrament service should be sacred in nature. Secular readings and songs are not appropriate during the service, but could be shared during the wedding reception or another part of the celebration. So I'm going to go ahead and disagree with that. But you do with it what you will. That's what this book says. And as I said, I think it's a bit dated. I think that, we can find truth and pieces of the divine that add to our spiritual experiences that we have with others, and especially in marriage relationships, and that those can be really sacred and valuable in a ceremony. So don't be afraid to include both aspects. Whatever is important to the couple is important to include. We'll go through a little worksheet later that will kind of help you get thinking, but consider that. Maybe look it up on your own to see, what your thoughts and feelings are. I personally think it's really important to include kind of aspects of both. And then this I had to include simply because it was fascinating. If you have your Doctrine and Covenants handy and you look at 111, 1D, let's see. Whoops, it helps to open the right book. 111, 1D. All right. We believe that it is not right to prohibit members of this church from marrying out of the church, if it be their determination so to do. But such persons will be considered weak in the faith of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So that was an interesting statement. I had never read that. If you're to flip through the priesthood manual, you'll see a little comment in there on that. And essentially the thinking on this part is that there was some concern that marrying outside the church, sometimes people choose to follow their partner's faith, or they find a different faith community and they don't stay in the church they were raised in. And so essentially it sounds like we're just trying to kind of keep people in the church. And so that's not a belief that we hold on to. People should marry it comfortably. And people should not necessarily feel that they are going to be weak in faith for marrying outside the church. So it's interesting to see how those views have changed over time in our tradition. Are there any questions that come up at this point? You can feel free to unmute if anything's come up for you. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I just wanted to add that Section 111 of the Doctrine and Covenants was given in 1835, so that's a long way back.
It is a long way back. And I believe that section 2, and I probably had it in my speaker notes and got thinking and looked over it, but if I'm to pull section 111 back up, I think it also says at the top of this, yeah, so it was presented August 17th, 1835, and this is not a revelation. So to be clear, it's in here, but it's not considered revelation. It was accepted and included by the body, but not revelation. So that does hold a little bit of different weight in our tradition. Thanks, Mike, for bringing me back to that. I appreciate that. Anything else on there? Awesome. So next, what makes marriage a sacrament? We've talked about how there's a public element. It's usually in a worship celebration. I think in the Doctrine and Covenants, in that same section 111, one of the situations where it suggests would be a good place for a marriage ceremony would be a feast. That sounds wonderful. We're having a marriage and we're having a feast and we're going to tack on a marriage. That sounds wonderful. So a feast would be good, a worship service, but there should be a public element because it's the community is invited to witness this covenant. So that's the one aspect. And as we talked about, this isn't simply a legal arrangement between two people. The covenant because God is also invited into this relationship. As these two people enter into marriage as equal partners, God is one of these covenant partners. And we touched on this. This sacramental nature comes from this covenant aspect because at its best, marriage is reflecting the love that's found in God's covenant with humankind, which I think is a very, very lofty goal. I think many of you are in marriages, and there are days when it does feel like that, and there are days when it doesn't. But that element of the covenant is that God is also the partner in our covenant relationship. It's not just the two here in the marriage. God is a partner in this covenant. And as we touched on before, we want to encourage people to have a faith community, friends outside the relationship that help to nurture both of them, to have the support of a faith community. All right. So I'm not going to say much really about polygamy or restoration history, because I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but as it concerns us for today, monogamy is the only marriage relationship that is recognized by Community of Christ. And this is going to show up again, the majority of the information on marriage that we're looking at as far as the sacrament comes from section 111. 4B. Sorry, sounds like a grain truck was going down the road. It was really loud. From section 4B. Inasmuch as this Church of Christ has been reproached with the crime of fornication and polygamy, we declare that we believe one man should have one wife, and one woman but one husband, except in case of death, when either is at liberty to marry again. So you can hear a little bit of institutional baggage when you read that. You can hear what people have been dealing with, and that we're very much writing in response to what they've experienced. So there's a couple of things here. They're affirming, monogamy, and then it also kind of reinforces this heteronormativity, talking about one man and one woman. Again, to Mike's point, this was written in 1835, so it does speak a bit to its own context, and it is, again, not revelation, but it certainly is something to look back at the way that we have viewed marriage and Community of Christ, and the way that that has formed and developed over time. Pretty much this heteronormative language that we find in section 111, it pretty much continues until the introduction of the National Conference model for addressing homosexuality in Community of Christ, and the way that acceptance was going to be moved through the church body. So switch to look at that a little bit. So national conferences were sort of a solution from headquarters to be able to move toward being a more inclusive church, looking at it on a nation by nation basis. We know that the way that homosexuality is accepted really varies country to country. And so we've seen that that approach country by country play out over the last 10-ish years or so. Canada and Australia approving ordination and marriage in 2013, and then same USA and British Isles in 2014. I'm going to try to show you this tool, but I've never done the sharing a portion of my screen thing, so we'll see what happens. All right, are you seeing still my slide, or do you see the Harmony website? Harmony website.
Yes, we see the
Awesome.
Harmony website.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm making leaps and bounds on the Zoom sharing thing. Okay, so we have this section under, if you go to, at the top bar, if you were to go under programs, you would see this information. So if you later want to look harmony.lgbt and then click on programs. We have an interactive map here that's going to look at countries. I'm trying to go slow so nobody gets nauseous. Look at countries that have some legal protection for LGBTQIA2S+ persons. And so I'll give you just a second to familiarize yourself with that. There are only a few countries where it is criminalized here. There are still several where there are no protections, but it's not criminalized. And then of course, anything in gray, we don't have a church presence there. So it's not that it doesn't matter, it's just we're not considering it for our purposes today. And then here is kind of how that map relates to church policy regarding marriage for the LGBTQ+ community. Try to get it in your little box. Here we go. That's maybe better. Okay, so affirming nations are the ones in pink. You can actually scroll, kind of hold your cursor over it, see what the legal protection is like, and whether they're affirming. So Australia, affirming since 2013. And I believe Canada is the same, affirming since 2013. to look here, you can kind of go and look Norway, 2015, Germany, 2019. If you want to look through, you can see the majority of these countries are within the last handful of years. But this is a good way to kind of track what's going on as each country has their national conference and we're able to expand that opportunity. So I just know I'm gonna close the wrong darn window, guys. Okay, we're back. There, okay. So I'll make sure that you get a copy of these slides as well, like I said, so that you can have the link, but the tracker tool is there, it's free, it's updated automatically as things change. If you're interested in more on the national conference policies, let us know. We can make those available. Your mission center presidents have them. I think what's interesting to point out, just looking at kind of the history of how the national conferences have worked, is to point out that there was an allowance for other levels of or other types of commitment ceremonies like civil unions and other legal relationships before marriage was actually legal. So there are some areas where Community of Christ was a little bit ahead and where the national conferences allowed us to do more things. We still have a lot of work to do, but it's pretty exciting to look through the tracker tool and see where we're becoming much more equal. So back to more boring administrative stuff. Who can perform a marriage in Community of Christ? Priests can perform a marriage as well as many of the other sacraments that you've been discussing or will be discussing over the next several months. Priests can perform a marriage as well as elders. And in Community of Christ, Melchizedek priesthood are also elders. So 70 and high priests would be considered elders as well and are able to perform marriages. This again goes back to our section 111(1)(c), and it outlines, it's not interesting, so I won't read it to you, but it says something like, presidents of high priests, priests, elders. It kind of lists them off. So that is where that comes from. But again, that's not revelation. And then this is, of course, subject to local legal requirements. This varies in the US, it varies state to state. I can't comment on how it might vary in your jurisdictions, but here sometimes it's county to county, it's state to state. So as the minister, you do have the responsibility beforehand of making sure that you're authorized per their requirements to be performing the marriage and that you are up to date on what the paperwork requirements are. In my state, for example, we don't have to prove anything ahead of time. We never have to show a card, any kind of certificate of ordination, kind of take you at your word. But the minister is responsible for handling all the paperwork after. So it's a lot of pressure not to lose that wonderful little signed document that you only get one of. But you want to know ahead of time what your responsibilities are, especially if your couple is leaving on a honeymoon right away. You want to be sure you're the person that they can count on to get them through that, the really important part of it. Okay, before marriage. So before you get to this, the church really encourages premarital counseling. Your little handbook here really advises that it's necessary, but we don't have a strictly required or recommended, series that people have to go through. I think it depends a lot on what the couple is like that you're working with, and it's always good to talk with other ministers who have done that in your area, who have worked with couples with a similar context to find out what has worked well for them. You're not required to report it. It doesn't go anywhere on any, marriage information. It's just something that you're kind of responsible to do. And I find that this is really an opportunity for people to learn about who Community of Christ is, what we believe, and what we're like. We talked a little bit earlier about what the church thinks about marriage or what makes it a sacrament. These are times to talk to the couple about God being invited into this relationship as part of a covenant. These are times to talk about our statement on sexual ethics and how important to us it is that people are cared for and whole in their physical relationships. It's an important time to talk about having a faith community and friends outside of your marriage, that keeping yourselves holy for each other doesn't mean only having friendships and relationships with each other, that having family and church family is important. So it's an opportunity to talk to them a bit about who we are and what we believe. I've had a few couples who I've done the wedding for, or Kurt has done a wedding for, that were not associated with Community of Christ. One later asked me to do the baby blessing for their daughter. They're still not church members, but when they need a place to touch down, to land safely, to have special moments in their lives, they know that they can trust us. They know that they can expect something from us that's going to be positive and whole. So it really can lead to more long-term relationships. As if you didn't need more pressure when you're doing a marriage, we're going to make it an evangelism opportunity too. So pressure's on. And then I want to show you this new tool that we just came out with. And so this is a harmony thing. And all the credit goes to Jenny Lowndes, who wrote this amazing resource. It loads a little slow, bear with me. Jenny Lowndes, or she was recently married. Her last name was Jenny Jackson. So you may know her better by that name, but Jenny Lowndes did all the hard work on this. Perfect. So it's kind of a three-part thing. Beforehand, a survey. This one's really fun, and I think it's kind of a gentle way to start with a couple. So as I said, there's no way that you have to do this, but this is kind of a way to do it. A lot of times we'll go out with our couple. Let's go for nachos. We're going out for tacos. We're going to do, we're going to go out for dinner together and chat. It's a good opportunity to get to know them. And the survey is something that you can send them home with to work on together. Same for the marriage preparation questionnaire. This one's going to go a little bit deeper, and it's going to walk them through, let me see if I can just open it here. It's going to walk them through a lot of things that we've talked about people needing to consider. Things like finances, whether or not they want to have children. It's going to give them an opportunity to talk to each other about it. Not that they necessarily owe you an explanation, to encourage conversation between the marriage partners. These also have a lot of really fun questions. What's your favorite date night? How long did you date before you were engaged? And it gives the minister a chance to get to know some fun things that you can throw in when you're planning kind of your marriage reflection to share with the congregation. So what are your individual passions? What is your song? What is something you admire most in each other? Such a sweet question. Okay, switch back. Oh my gosh, you guys are going to get to see every tab I have open on my screen while I try and find the right one. Okay, now we're back in business. So check those out. See what you think. They're free to download. They're Word documents, so you can even email them to your couple. They can type in them. They can print them, work on them at home together, whatever works for you. But it's a great resource. Just came out this week. I think we announced it yesterday or the day before, so really new. And then finally, the ceremony. This is, of course, the part that everyone's looking forward to and is most nervous about. There's a lot to plan, but know that as the minister, this is your primary responsibility. Often people know what they want in a service. They want a particular song. They want a reading. They want their aunt to be included in some way. They can know what they want, but people don't typically know all the elements. So it's something that you're kind of responsible for. There's an outline in this book in the back that's pretty good. You, of course, don't have to use the whole thing, but it gives you a starting point. It's a lot like worship planning. You probably don't want to start on Saturday night. If you're in charge on Sunday morning, you want to take the time that it deserves ahead. And the third resource that Jenny Lowndes wrote for Harmony is about planning the ceremony. And so it's going to ask, who do you have to have in your ceremony? Do you have a great aunt that you really want to include? Do you have a favorite scripture, or do you want suggestions for a scripture? It's going to walk them through that. But it's definitely something that you want to start ahead of time. This part I'm going to read purely because it's funny to me. We're again in section 111, and this is 2A and B. Marriage should be celebrated with prayer and thanksgiving, and at the solemnization, the persons to be married standing together, the man on the right and the woman on the left, shall be addressed by the person officiating as he shall be directed by the Holy Spirit. And if there be no legal objections, then it goes into the vow. But so it's going to actually tell us how we're supposed to do this. And it made me really laugh that it was so specific as to say the man should stand on the right and the woman should stand on the left. I don't know if we're facing the congregation, if we're facing the other way, if it matters which way is left or right, but it does have some advice in here, right? It's telling us that we have to plan ahead. We've got to be organized. We want to know what's going to be the plan when we get up there. Again, it's not a service where we're going to plan the night before. You're going to have the rehearsal and go through that. But there's some good advice in a few of those places. All right. And then, as I said, there's something that we are required to say. The majority of the marriages that I've done and that my husband has done are for folks outside of Community of Christ. And so this is something that you need to bring up right away. I haven't had any couples push back on or dislike necessarily that this had to be in there, but I think in some ways, because we are so flexible as a church and because we do really customize our worships to the situation and the context, it was kind of surprising to people that there was maybe a specific element that wasn't really negotiable. So be sure to bring that up ahead of time. So your phrase that you're required to say is, do you both mutually agree to be each other's companion, husband and wife, observing the legal rights belonging to this condition, that is, keeping yourselves holy for each other and from all others during your lives? So reading it and not being within the church, you can kind of see why there would be a few things to unpack. We talked already about the last section and being clear that we're not expecting people to have only one relationship or friendship for their whole lives, but that we're talking about relationships that are about respect and consent. This language is what's always been required for us to use with this very binary and heteronormative language. We get this variation with the inclusive language first showing up in the policies in response to the National Conference document. So if you were to look at any of the policies that came out of that, and so it kind of depends on where you're at in Europe, somewhere between 2014 and 2021, I think is when the majority of the congregations went through the policy, then you'll see this phrase used and said. Do you both mutually agree to be each other's marriage companion, observing the legal rights belonging to this condition, blah, blah, blah. So you can see how this more inclusive language still sets the same intent. It's really not changing the meaning for the marriage partners. I personally use this inclusive language in all of my services, whether the couple is one man and one woman or two men or two women. I tend to always lean on this inclusive language. And I think that has served us really well. So if you're looking for that, it's going to be in the slide, but you can also find it in your national conference policies. And then one kind of last thing I wanted to touch on is that we're not going to talk about divorce today because it's not really to do with the sacrament. But if you're looking for information on divorce, the priesthood manual has quite a bit of information here. If you're looking at what that is like, or as far as marriage after divorce, it is something that Community of Christ practices. Having come from I was raised in an evangelical tradition when I was quite small and converted to Community of Christ in the late 90s. I think that this was something that was, for me, helpful to see. Not that we encourage divorce or that we view marriage as temporary relationships, but that people are human and that there is a new avenue for a loving marriage relationship in the future. And not all churches work that way. So that's an important thing for us to know. It's also in Doctrine and Covenants in that same section, in section 111, and then in the priesthood manual on page 218, that individuals are free to marry after a partner's death. This is because we're going to go, like I said, we're not going to talk a ton about about Joseph Smith because I'm no expert, but I do want to note that marriage covenants are not viewed as valid after death. This comes from, if you've got your priesthood manual, it's on page 218. Before Joseph Smith's death in 1844, speculation regarding the eternal nature of marriage was present within the church. Suffice it to say that the reorganization always rejected the view that marriage covenants are valid after death. So we're finding that information, page 218. But it also says, one might suppose that speculation about eternal marriage is based in part, at least, on Jesus' statements that whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. That's in Matthew. And in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, also in Matthew. So if you're looking for more information on that, that's where you would go to get it. So where are we at with questions? We've kind of covered the majority of what I have set aside, but we have enough time to look more deeply at the resource or go through some questions. I'm curious to see where your thoughts are.
Linda, are you looking at the chat? There are some good ones in the chat.
Oh, you know what? When I'm sharing my screen, it is so hard to see the chat. Let me pull that up, and it would be good to be able to see your faces too while we talk. I can bring that up. Was that Gail? Thank you for telling me that.
Yep, it was me.
Oh, there's all kinds of good, you guys, you should have told me sooner. There's all kinds of good conversation in here. My gosh. Okay, Europe has done their thing. We address rights of marriage, but is there a standard clause addressing responsibilities of marriage? That's a really good question. I don't think we have a standard clause as far as the responsibilities of marriage. His question was Jeff. Good question. Can you talk a little bit more about what you're thinking on that? Or do you have a suggestion that maybe you have experience with?
No, I think there's a constant dialogue anymore in society about what are our rights and what are our responsibilities with different positions that we might hold. And I thought in the partnership, in this covenant that we have in marriage, we have a clause that we require that says, what our rights are. Mm-hmm. But I think that we should also have a clause showing that both partners have a responsibility to that covenant. Mm-hmm. I know that the other language, some of it was from the 1830s, and it's not revelation, but we tend to tell the husband what his rights were, and the wife was supposed to live up to meeting his expectation. And I just thought that maybe in modern times, it might be better to define that relationship as a partnership that both have to contribute to. And that was my, that's something that I bring up when I do marriage counseling before. And I was wondering if the church had ever considered adding something along those lines.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really interesting and helpful. I think that's part of what made me interested in bringing up the statement on sexual ethics, because it does outline a little bit about how we treat each other in those types of intimate relationships. But I would like to see something that's more about marriage or covenant relationships. I think that's a really good point. There are some outlines in here that talk about like if you were going to prepare, a short homily, or I hate to say a sermon because I think that's probably more than what most people want at their Community of Christ ceremony. We like to keep it short and get to the buffet, but your reflections. there are some kind of standard thoughts in here. And one of the things that it talks about is marriage being a mutual partnership, that it is meant to be focused on self-giving love, the way that disagreements, are meant to be resolved. And then it kind of leans back on the premarital counseling as well, like what you mentioned, Jeff. Would you be comfortable sharing what, if you have a specific resource that you use, or do you use more of like a conversational type model, or what works for you?
When I prepared for my first wedding ceremony, I went to a number of resources, and I don't know that I have one that suited everything that I wanted to discuss. But I get into expectations. I love what Jenny put together, but I don't think it goes far enough for what I do. I asked them, what are your expectations for a home, automobiles, investments? When do you want to retire? To make sure they're both going towards practical shared goals. So one of them isn't going to be disappointed if they never get out of their starter home. People have so many different expectations that could put pressure on a marriage. And, it's the thing with children. If you're going to have children, who disciplines the children? What are you comfortable with? In sharing those responsibilities, is public school enough? There are a lot of things that come into play. It gets into intimacy. And I didn't find that in a lot of our church materials when I first started. But what are your expectations? What are you comfortable with as a couple? So that 2 months from now, somebody said, this is not living up to my expectations. I want out, or else my partner has to change to keep this marriage alive. That should be addressed ahead of time. And also just how they want to handle conflict. If there is a disagreement, are they willing to turn to a pastor or somebody, go to counseling? What are their expectations for conflict resolution? But I don't know. I just, when I think of marriage, I think in a little bit broader reference, I think, than some. And I've had a number of people I've turned down. I just want to share, if they don't want to go through the counseling pre-marriage, I don't want to be a part of that. If they're not willing to put that effort in, I don't want to put my stamp and bring God into the equation if they don't want God in the equation. So,
Thanks, Jeff. I think that really good reflections. And I can't remember who it was. I saw in here someone said that they had a couple that elected not to get married after going through the process. So yeah, you're right. It's very valuable. Thank you for your sharing your expertise on that. Mike.
Linda.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just going to say, we've got Mike's hand up. We've got Laura, and I see Gail as well. And afterwards, I have a question from Bartosz she asked me to ask as well. So we've got 4 questions.
Sure. Great. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Thank you. I'll try to keep my question short. I've had some experience in marriage, so I feel at ease in marrying, but I have a marriage coming up in August, a woman-woman marriage, and I was not aware that there were inclusive marriage resources out there, so I'm very happy that they are there now, and I'll take a look at that. But Linda, do you have maybe a hint or something that would help me with an inclusive marriage? Since this is in Germany, they have been married for over a year now legally, which you have to do in Germany. So this is kind of adding the sacramental part to it. Do you maybe have something, a bag of gold you can just reach into and share a coin with me?
You know what I wouldn't give for a bag of gold, Mike. I think I've done a couple of ceremonies where, they were married legally beforehand. Sometimes because of the pandemic, they had like a courthouse wedding and they're having a sacrament later. So we'll call it, a celebration of their marriage or a celebration of that experience. and focusing more on, I don't know if they're particularly religious, but focusing more on, like you're describing, the covenant aspect. I will send some resources to Michael and make sure that they can get distributed, and maybe they can go in the description for this of some books that we're familiar with or that have been recommended through Harmony. I don't have them in front of me, but I think, yeah, just when you have this situation where they're kind of separate, and as we've said along, they're separate and yet they're entwined, and so it's kind of a funny aspect, a funny sacrament to have this governmental aspect. But yeah, really embellishing the what makes it a covenant, and I think particularly for couples who haven't always had the opportunity to be married, that is truly what makes this an amazing experience, is that God is entering into this relationship, and what an affirmation of their love for each other.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Laura.
Yes, thank you, Linda, and everyone. I really appreciated this. I do have one question. When doing a same-sex marriage, and I am from the United States, at the end, we have a tradition of saying, "And now I pronounce you husband and wife." Linda, what has been your experience in a phrase that is the best phrase to use? Do you usually ask the couple how they would like to be introduced?
Yeah, I find that usually asking them what their preference is ahead of time, even for heterosexual couples, because sometimes it's like, introducing Mr. and Mrs. Stanbridge, but I'm not changing my name, so it's always good to ask, and then providing a couple of options. So, now introducing the Stanbridges, or just Kurt and Linda, the new couple, the happy couple, our newest, whatever, giving them different options and just kind of seeing what really speaks to them. And like I said, I think it applies to hetero couples as well, kind of what fits their family and how they see their relationships. Sometimes people will hyphenate, and that's kind of a fun way to introduce or announce what their new last name is going to be together. So yeah, really good question. Gail.
Okay, one thing that hasn't been brought up, and I'm going to because it always concerns me, engagements are made to be broken. And I get really concerned when I hear a couple, and especially the woman, saying, "It's my day, it's my big day." No, it's not. And I think that can be addressed in marriage counseling, premarital, but it is something that we don't think about, and we don't really talk about it, is that what do you do before you get to that premarital counseling point? What happens if you do break it off? It's important to consider all of this because it's going to lay the groundwork for the marriage, as has been stated here.
There's certainly a lot of cultural stuff that gets in the way of us remembering that we are entering into a covenant with our partner and with God, and that desire, and that, we're socialized to believe that the bigger the wedding is, the better it is. And, do they have a full bar? Is it a cash bar? Is it going to be a buffet, or is it plated? There are so many things to think about that it certainly is easy to get lost in just those aspects of it, and not treating the engagement as a period of preparation, right? And this time to, because when you are viewing it as a covenant that you're entering into, you wouldn't enter into a big agreement with another person without really deeply thinking about it and considering all your options. So yeah, maybe preparation period is a better way to think of an engagement. And maybe you can do that and have a really big wedding dress and an open bar too, but not getting so absorbed into the cultural aspect of marriages as to lose sight of the sacrament. Yeah, thanks, Gail.
I'm asking a question on behalf of Bartosz.
Hi, Bartosz.
He wrote, he's joining us from Poland, and has been with us in the Sacrament series, and has joined us in Community Circle for quite some time, has become a dear friend. He says, is the view of marriage lacking an eternal nature in Community of Christ only connected to the reorganization's rejection of polygamy, or are there other doctrinal or historical reasons for that?
You know, I don't know if I can give I don't know if I can give an expert answer on that. I think, you know, I'm certainly not an expert on polygamy in the Restoration, but I think when we're looking at the time period that we were in, what were we in, Mike, 1837-ish? We do see a lot of institutional baggage there. And I think part of what you see through that time and even into the 1900s is a little bit of defining ourselves by what we're not, or being something because then we're not that. And so that's certainly possible that that's part of it. I wish I had a better answer. Certainly if someone else knows, feel free to reflect on that, but that would be probably my assumption. It does reference, let me go back to my slide so I can give you the page number. Yeah.
I was going to say also, New Testament, I can't quote you scripture and verse on this right at the moment. It's in the New Testament. I just heard it this morning. I'm embarrassed. There is no marriage in heaven.
Yeah, I think that comes from Matthew, is what I was looking up. So if you have your, I know you are all sleeping with us on your nightstand right now. If you're on page 218, it refers to what Gail is bringing up. And so it looks like it's Matthew 22:30. In the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage. The interesting part of that is that also in Matthew, a few chapters earlier, Jesus says, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. So the priesthood manual kind of points to them. We see this a lot in the Bible. It contradicts itself frequently and tells multiple stories, which gives us the joy of being able to constantly engage with it from different aspects. But yeah, there's certainly a few different things going on here. Thanks, Gail, for bringing that up.
I'm going to let Andrea go, and then I'd like to say something.
Sure. Go ahead, Andrea. How are you?
Good. Hey, Linda, where do you find the statement that's inclusive, that's required to be read? You said national.
Yeah. So as far to my knowledge, the only place that it is in print is in the national conference, the policy that was in response to the national conferences.
How would people know that, though? I mean, this is the first time I've ever heard about that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's something that, you know, as we continue to move forward in, you know, revising policies and creating better resources, it's something that needs to be included in a more accessible place, because to get your hands on those policies is actually pretty difficult. Your mission center presidents should have them. But it is not in print anywhere very accessible. I'll put it in the chat and it'll be on the slides. I'll make sure that Michael gets them. And this will be published to YouTube as well. And so like I said, I broke the rules and put a lot of type on there so you'd be able to see it later. But yeah, I think the policies would be the best place to normally to get.
Thank you.
Good question, Andrea.
I just wanted to make more of a statement than a question, but it just kind of goes along with what you've been talking about, Linda, especially being a person who is married to another man. It's only been legal in the country that I live in since 2018. And I also broke my faith tradition over this major part of my life. So went from the LDS tradition to Community of Christ. So the planning of our wedding was really important, because we were going to be hosting not only Italian Catholics in Antonio's family, but also my LDS family. We'd be hosting them to see our covenant of love together. And so it was really important for us to plan well. We wanted the Spirit to be present. We wanted people to understand that what our love meant for each other, and that it was the same as anybody else's love. And it was a beautiful moment for so many. So many of Antonio's family comes from the south of Italy, which is so traditional in nature, yet they came to Rome to be with us, and they were very moved by the ceremony, and probably the drag queens that danced at our reception. But that's another story. And then in our Community of Christ service was in the United States. My parents were not able to travel due to health concerns. So we decided to not stress them, and to have my intimate family, my nieces, my nephews, my brothers, my sisters, all come to a wedding in Houston where we had a CFC service. So to have my restoration-based family come with trepidation, a little nervousness, but still with so much love for us, to come and see what that was like and to participate. One of the most moving parts for us was that we decided that we would have everyone present bless our rings. So we passed them to all of my family and asked them to please bless the rings that we would hold on our fingers. And that was so moving to us. And my family said that was very moving for them to have an outward action to bless our marriage. So I just wanted to say something to the aspect of planning. It is important, not only so that the day runs smoothly and everybody knows what's going on, but I think it's an invitation, just like we do in worship. It's an invitation for the Spirit to be present and to touch those. And that can be definitely in heterosexual marriages as well, especially if there's a little suspicion about the couple, should these people be getting married when they have had confirmation they should be getting married. But also in a new time period when society has now allowed us to have that same blessing as queer people, I think it's important to do that, because it's an opportunity for all to be encircled in that love.
No, thank you so much for sharing your testimony of marriage, which is just beautiful and really kind of encapsulates what we've been talking about today. So thank you so much for adding that. And then you reminded me that we didn't really talk about symbols. I meant to bring that up at some point. You mentioned passing the ring around and everyone blessing it. Sometimes we'll have a unity candle, different events, but as with lots of sacraments, no doubt you've talked about symbols. And there are lots of ways to include those symbols in our sacraments. Thank you, Michael, so much for sharing that beautiful story. I'm just reading, I can't tell whose comment it was. If a person has been married more than once because of a death of a spouse, then if marriage after death continued, which spouse would the person be married to? Yeah, it's a really complicated question. There's a lot of layers there. Really good point.
Well, I just want to thank everybody. We've come to we're just about 3 minutes over our time period, but that means this was a healthy conversation and we learned lots from each other. I want to thank, on behalf of Community Circle, I want to thank Linda for being with us and contributing and taking the time. I know this is a very busy time period for you with camps going on, but to come to us and camp with us for 1 hour and learn some more about the sacraments, especially from somebody that devotes part of her ministry to not only her normal church community, but to the LGBTQ community, too, in harmony. This is one of those sacraments that's had a lot of change over the years and has a lot of, like you said, it has baggage that comes along with it in the restoration, but it also has been something that has been beautifully developed for many years and continues to bless the lives of so many. So thank you for being with us. I want to thank everybody for attending today over your lunch hour, if you're in North America like I am this week, and the evening in Europe. I'm wishing everybody a lovely rest of the day. And I'll have information out to everybody very soon about the fall schedule for the continuation and finishing of our sacraments series. Like I had said in the beginning, we'll take July and August off, but we'll be back in September, October, November. We have people like John Hamer from Canada who will be coming to present. We have Catherine Mumbwe, the apostle from Africa, coming also to present this fall. So we have some wonderful, lovely things coming your way. So blessings to all, and we'll see you very soon.